Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Gena Abraham. We've got almost a full house today because of the interest in transportation, and particularly, certainly throughout the state, but particularly in the metro area. If you just trace what she's been doing since the turn of the decade, she's had quite a busy decade so far. When the decade began, she was getting her doctorate at Georgia Tech, which she did in civil engineering. And she then started as an assistant professor, and in 2003, while she was an assistant professor at Tech, she was named by the governor, Governor Perdue, as executive secretary and construction director for the Georgia State Financing and Investment Commission. Then, in 2006, while in that position, she was named again by the governor to be in charge of all the functions of the state property office. Broad-ranging responsibilities there. She was charged with consolidating the management of all real estate assets, their leases, at a time where we didn't know how many leases we had, how much real estate we owned. Again, dealing with a very complex and bureaucratic situation. She went on to develop best practices there, renegotiating multi-year leases and so on. Then, in 2007, as you know, she was selected by the State Transportation Board as the first woman commissioner of Georgia Department of Transportation, with its 6,000 employees and its $2 billion budget. If you poll most people in the metro today, the #1 problem they say we face is transportation. So she's jumped from one tough bureaucracy into another tough bureaucracy, and where Secretary of State Handel was saying that her reputation as a no-nonsense person, but also very often she may be the smartest person in the room. Very needed qualities to untangle what we have with our delivery system on transportation in the state. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, Dr. Abraham.
Gosh, sorry, I'm short. You have to see over this podium. Well, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here today, and I want to take a few minutes to recognize some important people that are here with me today. And first, I'd like to start with some of my board members that are with me today. Mr. Emery McClinton, who is our transit guy on our board, who scored a huge victory at our last board meeting, and we're going to talk a little bit more about commuter rail today. Yay. That's right. I'm excited about it, too. Mr. Garland Penholster, who's with us today as well, and Mr. Robert Brown, also up front, is also. And I don't think I've seen any more of my board members back there, so if you are, thank y'all for being here. I'd also like to recognize, of course, our statewide elected officials, Ms. Karen Handel, our Secretary of State, dear friend, and also our representatives and senators that are here. And then I'd like to take a minute to say thank you to some of our partners, and we have a lot of partners in our room today. We have our Georgia Highway Contractors Association, Mr. Steve Parks. We have our Engineering Association folks here. We also have our partners, my partners in crime, Chick Krautler with ARC and Dick Anderson at Greta, and those guys have been absolutely invaluable to me over the past few months that we've been starting to talk about and move in different directions in transportation in Georgia. I also want to thank you for inviting me here today to speak with you, but I expressly want to thank Rogers Wade, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation and Board of Governors, for having me here. And so I'm going to jump into transportation. We're going to talk about what I have in front of me as the charge with our department, and what we are all going to be working towards collectively together to make changes in our transportation system here. Secretary of Transportation Mary Peters said something very boldly and declared that it's time for transportation reform that encourages innovation rather than stifling it, that it integrates approaches rather than stovepiping them, and it cuts through red tape to focus on outcomes. She further declared that process requirements that are not producing outcomes are not worth keeping, and that neither are funding approaches that are out of step with modern financing and national goals. And I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more with what she says, that if there are processes that are not working, we need to fix them. If there are approaches that do not allow innovation, that we need to be innovative in transportation. So I've told my staff that, we don't just agree with that ideology, but that we have to live it and that we have to breathe it. If we ever want to be successful at GDOT in achieving the mission of GDOT, which is to provide a safe and seamless transportation system that supports Georgia's economy and is sensitive to its citizens and environment, Secretary Peters' bold declaration, that's our board member. He knows this story. So Secretary Peters' bold declaration must become our mantra for reform. And let's take a look first at where GDOT is today. And let's talk about that openly and honestly. We are facing a transportation funding crisis. I don't think that's any news to anybody. Everybody has asked me, well, where do you stand on our transportation funding issues? And I'm the first to tell you, and clearly, as I have said from the very beginning, that we need more funds for transportation. There's no doubt about it. We have a booming metropolitan Atlanta population that's exceeding 5 million. We're the 4th largest and fastest growing state in the country. Traffic congestion ranks first as of last week according to Forbes. Highway construction costs have... Thanks, Mr. Brown. Highway construction costs have risen dramatically, and in the last 10 years, highway construction costs alone have risen about 35%. So needless to say, we are facing a lot of issues. Right-of-way costs, I don't think I have to tell you how much real estate prices have gone up in metropolitan Atlanta. And for us to believe that we can continue to build ourselves with roads and bridges out of this transportation issue is just not a realistic expectation any longer. We can't just keep adding lanes to all of our interstates. So the combination of all of these factors is really forcing transportation planners and engineers to explore new ways to effectively operate the existing transportation network and system that we have in Georgia. And this is not just an issue that we're facing in Georgia. This is a national issue. This is something that everybody's facing across the country. So let's talk about where we're headed. Right now, Atlantans travel 131.7 million miles every day. And in Georgia, 307 vehicle miles are traveled daily. Over the past 10 years, daily traffic on Georgia's urban roadways has increased by 51%. 2 million more people are expected to move in metropolitan Atlanta over the next 12 years. We anticipate that in the 2010 census that we will be getting 2 more congressional districts and 2 more board members to boot. Metropolitan Atlanta saw a net growth of 55,000 jobs in 2007. So needless to say, our future is definitely bright, but we do have some challenges. And if, I've heard the governor say in the past, and some of the board members as well, that these are the kinds of challenges that we would rather have. We would not rather have those challenges that are, that we have a depressed economy and people are not moving to Georgia. That is not our issue. Our issue is that we have a booming metropolitan Atlanta and a booming Georgia. We do have some issues, though, and we're going to talk about some of those, and we're going to talk about some of the steps that we're already collectively taking to work on our transportation issues here. Many of the policymakers on the state and local level, inside and outside of Atlanta, are viewing our future in transportation with, great trepidation and apprehension. Mary Peters has said that working towards a time when commuters aren't afraid of their commute, businesses aren't hamstrung by delivery delays, and shippers aren't sidelined by traffic tie-ups. Now, I can tell you, I get up and I go to work every morning, and it's about 36 miles for me. And some mornings it takes 45 minutes, and some mornings it takes as much as 2 hours and 15 minutes, which was my first day at GDOT. Which, boy, that sent a clear message to me on my very first day. So how do we get to that place where we aren't concerned about our commute and we're not leaving 30 minutes to our off before an appointment out of our office? And I think some of the things that we are already starting to work on will help us move in that direction. Now, do I think I can solve all the transportation issues, or the department or our board or all of our partners can solve all of those issues? No, I don't. But I think we can be realistic about it, and if we work collectively together, that's what we have to do to change the paradigm. We've already begun something that I'm very, very excited about. On March 28th, my partners and I all went to Brownstown Valley with GDOT and all of our staff members, and we started talking about a statewide transportation plan. Now, I can tell you, I was surprised to find out that this was the first time that each of our state agencies had been in a room together in transportation to talk about transportation issues. ARC, Greta, CERTA, and GDOT had never collectively sat down to talk about a long-term strategy. So a simple meeting for 2 days to really start breaking ground on where we wanted to be. And I've heard Chick say, and Dick Anderson as well say, that what we need to be looking at is a 5 to 10 year strategy, something that we can truly deliver for the state of Georgia. And we're going to talk some more about that as well. We had 40 key staff members that weekend. We started talking about agency roles. There's been lots of discussion about what does CERTA do, what does Greta do, what does GDOT really do, and who has those responsibilities. And we've started outlining some of those first steps to make a new direction for who does what in transportation. And I was the first to come to the table and ask some simple questions about, well, who does planning? And I jokingly said that I would give planning to anybody who would volunteer for planning. And I couldn't find a whole lot of takers to take all the planning work. But what I found out is that it's a difficult integrated system for transportation planning in Georgia. And I can tell you that ARC does a phenomenal job for metropolitan Atlanta, but we also have 14 other MPOs, we have CIDs, we have multiple people in the planning process. And the question is, how do we get all of these folks focused on those projects that are going to be the most efficient and most effective for the state of Georgia? And which ones will go first, and why? And that's a very big charge in front of us. We also had Rodney Berry from the Federal Highway Administration. We had Myra Emmings from the Federal Transit Authority, and Janine Miller from the Governor's Office. And that's the first time again that we had all been in a room to talk about a long-term strategy for transportation. Now, we all have plans. I have a plan, ARC has a plan, GDOT has a plan. There are multiple plans in the state. The question is, which one are we going to proceed with, and which ones can we truly afford? And that's where we've got to head over the next 5 to 10 years to pick out those projects that really provide a connected transportation system in Georgia. The second thing that I want to talk about is that's just our first step in statewide transportation planning. I have read tons of transportation plans, but the reality of it is we've let to construction 270 projects last year. Now, as of the last count, let me make sure I get the count right. As of last count, which was on Monday, we have 8,476 projects on the books. Now, 270 divided by 8,476 divided by 270 is a lot of work to be done. Now, I can tell you that I don't plan to be here for 30 plus years at the Department of Transportation to get all these projects finished. At 270 projects per year, which 270 projects are going to be the most efficient, most effective, and provide the biggest bang for our bucks? So that's what we're all going to have to be collectively striving towards over the next few years. We have 5,229 projects alone in planning. Now, I can tell you that 3,884 of those are not active. We only have 1,345 where a human body is actually assigned to it and working on those projects. So we've got to figure out exactly what 270 projects we will proceed with, and that's what project prioritization is going to be about this summer. We are very excited to be involved with our partners on project prioritization, and we have signed a memorandum of understanding with Greta and ARC to start looking at some of our first projects through this process. It will be an objective project prioritization component, and I think that's very important for each of you to understand. We are going to be putting engineering criteria and testing these projects against engineering criteria. Our first group of projects just went through the first test the month of April, and that was on our new capacity projects in metropolitan Atlanta. So we just finished that, and in fact, I was talking to Dick yesterday, and we're going to be pulling together a group of us to start looking at those results. Now, we're basing that on the Congestion Mitigation Task Force recommendations of 70% congestion relief as being the main criteria, with the other 30% divided among things like benefit costs, things like traffic counts, those true engineering principles that will help us determine which projects move forward. So we've worked on this MOU. We've got this first thing in place, project prioritization, this summer. And what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're going to have to cut projects off of our books. And I can tell you that, with 5,229 in preliminary engineering, with only 1,345 active, there is no way that we're going to finish this project prioritization process and keep all of those projects on our books. And that's a very hard reality that all of us are going to have to come to. I feel like my most important job as Commissioner of DOT is to lead the department to move towards those projects that are the right projects that we can afford and that we are financially responsible, and then deliver an actionable plan so that we can deliver those projects. And so that's where we're headed. What does that mean for local communities? What does that mean for the state in transportation? It means that some very tough choices are going to occur this fall. It means that we're going to have to be looking at these projects, and we're going to have to be examining what projects really should move forward and why. And then there's going to be some tough decisions that the board and the department, along with our partners, will have to make about projects that will or will not proceed. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. This won't be a whole lot of fun for any of us, but I think it's the right way to head. I think we've got to deliver on those promises that we've set forward. So our chief engineer, Gerald Ross, is working with our senior staff at the other agencies to work through this process over the summer. That means meeting specific criteria, sound engineering principles, and looking at ways to relieve congestion in Atlanta. And this means that the old policy of local governments coming to GDOT headquarters and kissing or saluting the ring in order to get a project is over. I just won't be doing that. I can tell you clearly that we're going to be looking at each of these projects from a very objective standpoint. And we found that when we try to be all things to all people, that we risk being nothing to everyone. And that is my biggest concern. So the third thing that we're going to be looking at is innovative financing and alternative financing. One of the things that I've recommended to the board that I think we'll be talking about on our retreat in June is we will be looking at ways to align our board committees to our long-term strategies and initiatives. And one of the suggestions that I've made to the board so far is that we change our name of our Public-Private Partnership Committee to Alternative Financing, because we're going to have to look at alternative ways to finance our projects. I think everybody knows what public-private partnerships or public-private initiatives or public-private agreements are, whether they're PPAs, PPIs, or PPPs. I think everybody understands what that is about. That means bringing private sector dollars to help us build our projects, but that also means tolls. That means that we're going to have to be examining toll roads across our state in order to look for ways to finance some of our projects. Fully supported by the Federal Highway Administration, and this is fully supported by Mary Peters. She's made several comments that public-private partnership will be a way of the future for transportation. We can leverage public funding with those private resources, and I can tell you that's what I've been talking to all of my partners, whether it's local, city, county, state governments, state partners as well, is that we've got to look at these projects to ensure that we have local participation. And that's what benefit cost ratios help us examine, is how those local communities can help us move forward, because we're going to be looking for more partners in this initiative. It's an important component for a comprehensive response to congestion in and around Metro Atlanta. I can assure you that I cannot afford to buy the right-of-way to expand 285. I can assure you that I can't afford the right-of-way to expand 400. So we're going to have to be looking for innovative ways to finance it and innovative projects. We're trying to arrange a trip with some of our board members now for June to go down and take a look at Tampa at some of the elevated structures that they're putting in place. We also need to go and take a look at what Texas is doing. Texas is on the leading edge of public-private partnerships. So we've got a few trips that will be coming up that we're going to be looking at what other states across the nation have done to solve some of these transportation issues. I think as part of alternative financing, I'm sure everybody wants to know about the taxing issues and where I stand. And I can tell you clearly that we need more transportation dollars. And I can tell you also that from a taxing standpoint, there are a couple of things that we will be looking at next year that I think are very important that I've talked to the board about already. GDOT does not currently get the 4% of the tax right now. And that 4% goes back to the Treasury and is reallocated across state governments. And that's about $180 million. And I think that's important that we start looking at that 4% to see if we can actually move those dollars to transportation. The other thing that is very unique for the Department of Transportation is that we're the only state agency that pays all of our debt service for our general obligation bonds. There's no other state entity that does that. The only one that comes close is the Georgia Ports Authority, but they do not pay all of their debt service back for GO bonds. It's a portion of it. That's another $200 million that comes directly off of our motor fuel collections to go back and pay that GO bond debt service. So I can tell you that's something that we also will be looking at and asking for some support and help on to bring about $400 million to the department without new taxes. And that is, that is something that I'd like to pursue. I can tell you the board has been very supportive of those comments so far. We'll have to look at a strategy. We'll have to look at how we put that into our budgets next year. But that's something that I think is definitely worth looking at. Without new taxes, that's $400 million we could immediately look towards. Now, do I think I'm going to get it all? That's a whole other question and above my pay grade. I can tell you that for sure. The same with taxes and the mechanism and the structure in which we would look at and examine new taxes. I have stayed out of that debate on new taxes because I think I can tell you we need more funding, but the mechanism and the methods in which that we would pursue those new funding issues is, again, a governor, lieutenant governor, speaker, and a legislative issue. And I think that's something that I've truly enjoyed the debate on in the last legislative session that brought about a lot of thoughts and my ideas. I've come full circle on some of those taxing issues and seeing some of the proposals that are out there and actually walking through step by step where we are brings about a lot of questions that I thought were very beneficial for the tax discussion debate last year. And I'm sure that will continue on until next year. A couple of projects that I think are important that we should mention that are looking at ways that we can move forward in transportation is one of the things that we've been looking at is a managed lane policy and HOV to hot. And the board passed a resolution, I think 2 board meetings ago, in which we have looked at, the board has directed us to examine and look forward, look very closely and develop a plan and strategy, bring that plan and strategy back to the board at converting our HOV lanes to hot. Now, do I have all the answers on those questions yet? No, I don't. We are working on that plan now. We've set up 9 separate committees with our partners at Greta and ARC and CERTA and several other agencies involved to start examining that process of how we would move from HOV to hot. Now, is that going to solve all of our problems? Absolutely not. But what it will do for us is guarantee time travel, guaranteed trip time travel. And that's something that I think is very important. Also, one of the things that I think is important about this is this will provide us some information that we have not had in the past. We do not know, CERTA currently has 1 toll road, which you all know, Georgia 400. This will provide us some information about the capabilities of that authority and that organization to move into a different tolling environment. It will also provide us some information about congestion pricing, things that we've never done in the city of Atlanta and metropolitan Atlanta and Georgia. So it's going to provide a very good litmus test for some of those things that we've had questions out there on that we've studied a lot but don't have definitive data on. So I think this HOV to hot is going to provide us some realistic information that will help us move towards a long-term strategy on public-private partnerships. And of course, these are occurring all over the country as we speak. I also want to mention something that I am very excited about that the board passed at the last board meeting that didn't get written about. Everything else in my personal life did. But I can tell you that the board was very, very excited, and so was I, about passing a resolution to look at commuter rail and telling us to actively and aggressively proceed with the Lovejoy line from Atlanta to Lovejoy. And that is a huge step, I believe, in the right direction. And I can tell you that we are doing that. In fact, Mr. McClinton calls me practically every day to ensure that we are. And Mr. McClinton is going to be on that first train, I'm sure. So I can tell you that we are actively looking at that plan and those steps to look at that Lovejoy line. What you may or may not know is that we have $109 million in Federal Transit Authority dollars to look at that line, but what we don't have the answer on is operations and maintenance long term. And so that's something that I can tell you that we will be working on and examining our options, and I think that's a very big policy question, and I think that's a very big discussion long term. If you look across the country, commuter rail is typically subsidized in some form or fashion. We took some of our board members to Chicago, New York, and Boston, and we found that we found that in all of those cities, commuter rail and other types of transit were subsidized, sometimes as much as 70%, sometimes as low that we found in the country so far, around 50%. So operations and maintenance is something that we're going to have to look at very, very clearly. But I can tell you, Greta has done a great job of stepping into transit and looking at our express buses. Our express bus numbers are just going out of sight in every quarter that we're in. And this is a good way, and the way we've been talking about it from Greta, ARC, CERTA, and GDOT's perspective, is this express bus system is a first step in looking at transit in a particular corridor, and then coming back with a long-term solution in that corridor for transit. So with rising gas prices, I can tell you my phone is ringing off the hook about transit right now. And I can tell you that's something that the board has been pushing for and passed that resolution to head us in that direction. And I'm very proud of that first step to move GDOT in that transit operation component. So those are some of the big initiatives that we're going to be looking at. I can tell you, we're looking at the statewide transportation plan, alternative finances, and the last thing that I should mention is project and program delivery. And I can tell you that's probably what some of our partners have been most upset with me and GDOT about is project and program delivery. And by going through project prioritization and defining what 270 projects we have, and we'll be moving forward over the next 5 to 10 years in that manner, around 300 projects per year, we should be able to do exactly what we say, which is deliver those projects, and that is our intent. We're going to be looking at alternative delivery options, construction management at risk, design build, and I can tell you right now I've met with Federal Highway, and Federal Highway has authorized us to look at the construction management at risk delivery method. Now currently statutorily we don't have that in place. So we'll also be looking at our project and program delivery statute next year and looking at ways that we can step into alternate delivery that should help us move towards a faster, more efficient project and program delivery. So those three big things, statewide transportation, alternative financing, and project and program delivery is where we're going to be moving in the future. Just a few of the key areas that we're focusing on. I can tell you, the more I'm there, every day that I'm there, I find out of another really interesting program that we do at GDOT. So I could spend several hours up here talking about all the things that we do. But I can tell you that we have got to move forward with these initiatives. I feel like they're extremely important for the department and for our board to provide support in those areas, and so far everything seems to be moving in that direction. I can tell you that's where we're headed, and I can sum it up in one statement what the new policy for operations at GDOT really is, and it'd be based on that bold declaration from Mary Peters that I began the address with. Yet I know that in order to really meet those challenges we face and to get to the time of no fear of commutes and delivery options that I've talked about, I've got to get beyond that bold declaration. And, I know I must heed the words of wisdom from another transportation expert, Henry Ford, that said you can't build a reputation on what you're going to do. You've got to go do it. And I think that's the most important thing for us is we've got to set our goals and then we've got to deliver it. With your help and with the help of our policymakers under the Gold Dome and our partners that are all here today across the state, we can build a reputation in Georgia and for Georgia transportation based on what we've done. And I think that's extremely important. And I can tell you that I look forward to that when we can basically say that these are the projects we're going to deliver, this is why we're going to deliver them, and then we deliver them. So thank you for having me here today, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Yes, sir.
Given that commuter rail is the fastest, most efficient way to move masses of people, what can we do to help you get that going in Georgia?
I can tell you there's some things that I've got to go through and look at. One is there's some interesting financing options that were presented to the board that I'm going through right now and verifying, and we're kind of doing that every single day. I can tell you that we've got a plan that we're going to talk to the board about in Toccoa over the next few days. But the real big piece is the operations and maintenance component. And that means that we're going to have local community support and input as to how we handle this operations and maintenance agreement long term. We also, right now, just to be frank about it, one of the real interesting questions that I'm having a hard time nailing down is who's going to operate this thing? I mean, if you look across the state, if you look across other states, Georgia Department of Transportation or IDOT or NYDOT or MNDOT, they don't operate commuter rail. There's another entity, typically another transit authority, that truly operates commuter rail. So that to me is a very big policy question that we have to undertake, is who the long-term operator would be for this commuter rail line. And we do have some entities that are already in existence that could do that. And the question is which one. And so I've got to get through that policy question, and then I've got to deal with the financial components of operations and maintenance.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner,
Yes, sir.
Would you quantify the shortfall that exists in funding over the next 7 to 10 years that involves that 1,345 or so projects that are in active planning?
Yes, sir. There's 1,345 projects that are in preliminary engineering, and that represents about $29.5 billion worth of construction dollars. So if I went to, if I finished all 1,345, bought right-of-way and construction, it would be $29.5 million with no contingencies and no escalations over the life of the project. So that number would be significantly larger. So that's just the funding shortfall on those projects. Now currently, I'm not sure if you're asking the question about the current issues where we are. Okay, so that's sort of the first one, is just those 1,345 represents $29.5 billion. We get a little over $2 billion a year, and so that translates to 15 years worth of work just from a financial perspective of those 1,345 projects. Now, what we have done is I sort of liken it to a mortgage on your house. We have two programs. One is a Garvey program, which is a bond program that you basically go out and sell bonds for future federally appropriated dollars. And to date, we have $1.2 billion on our books. But I can tell you, I will be asking the board to approve in September, sometime that time frame, another $600 million for those dollars that we've already committed to in projects. Now, the question that I've been working on with the state auditor is, are those true commitments? Are those obligations? And what is the difference between a commitment and an obligation? And do I have a contract for all of those previous commitments? Some I do, some I don't. And so we're sorting through whether this approximately $1 billion shortfall is whether I've got a contract associated with all of that, or whether that project is just authorized by the feds. Now, there are some projects that have money on them that have been authorized, but we've only spent a very small portion of that job. And so through this project prioritization process, we're going to be looking at all of those and figuring out, have we got a contract in place? How much money is spent on that contract, and what do we do to proceed with that project, or should that project proceed from an objective standpoint? So I'm still working on that question of whether it's a commitment, an obligation, or what right now. And we don't have an answer. I met with them yesterday, and we don't have an answer yet. So does that answer the question, sort of, kind of?
I guess in the scope of, say, a 10-year window, you're looking at shortfalls, i.e. delivery costs, less revenue to bring those projects, put them in place in the tens of billions of dollars.
I can tell you, well, first of all, we get 2.7 roughly, and I can tell you that I'm looking at making sure that those 270 or so projects equals 2.7 billion. And I can't spend more than I earn. I think all of us can understand that basic principle. And we have basically in 2 years, in 05 and 06, in construction alone, we spent $2.2 billion one year and 2.6. Now that doesn't include right-of-way, preliminary engineering, operations costs, debt service, and all those other things. So I think you can sort of see where we've come to, now. The rubber's sort of meeting the road. I guess. At this point, the rubber's meeting the road as far as financially is concerned, to try and get us back fiscally responsible. And I'm just very concerned about what that means. Now, I've met with our transportation partners and told them that we anticipate about a $1.1 billion program of funds that I have left for 09. And that's after we start setting up contingencies on projects. We've never had contingency set up on our projects. In 2 years, we basically exceeded our budget to the tune of $1 billion one year and $1 billion the next. And with 2.7 coming in and $1 billion over, that to me is not really fiscally responsible. And so we've got to get that squared away. We got to set up contingencies on those jobs and move towards true project budgeting. And so we've got a lot of work to do in that arena. I can tell you that my #1 priority right now is trying to get a handle on a good, sound financial statement and balances on where we are federally and state with state dollars. That's probably a long-winded way to say that, yes, sir, that we're looking at we've moved over $1 billion into 2009, and I can tell you that I won't have the money to fund all of those projects that have moved from 2008 to 2009. So project prioritization is going to be key in basically removing that gap between what's authorized and what's funded. What else can I answer?
Commissioner?
Yes, sir.
Paul Snyder on behalf of Georgians for the Brain Train. What is your current understanding on how long federal funds that are available right now for implementation of commuter rail will remain available?
I've not had a specific discussion with FTA on that, about the term of that agreement. So far, we have not had any trouble whatsoever on that $109 million looking at moving forward with that. So we still have an active commitment, the latest discussions that I've had. So right now, everything seems to be safe and secure on that $109 million. That's the latest that I have as of today. Yes, sir. I'm told one more question. Did I see one? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Ron Siphon. We've had, it seems like one of the things that maybe you need to clarify is we've had a mindset for a long time of trying to, we've been focused on unprioritized wish lists, and it seems like you're trying to go in a direction of a different mindset of, wait a minute, as opposed to trying to fund everything, let's identify what is going to give us the most cost-effective benefit for the dollars that we've got available. And maybe it would help to elaborate on the distinction of those two mindsets.
Well, I don't think there's any mystery about how 9,211 projects got on our books. And, you know, it is clear that we can't afford 9,211 projects. And as of today's date, there's 8,476 that we've gone through and closed out projects, are moved in different directions, and basically trying to get some of these things off our books that have been there for years. And we've got a whole host of projects that are also in closeout, you know, process also. So yes, sir. You stated our direction very, very clearly. It's in my mind, you know, I can't continue to promise things that I can't deliver, and that's just not who I am. I'm just not going to do that. And I can tell you that I'm going to look at those projects that are the most efficient and effective and get the biggest bang for our buck when it gets to Georgians traveling through our state. And what are those projects, and why are we doing those projects? And I think one of the things that we need to think about a little bit differently is not just a list of projects, but a transportation system. And I think that is a big, big difference between what we've had in the past, is a long, lengthy list of projects instead of thinking about this holistically. And I think one of the things that we also need to do in the statewide transportation plan that we've had some brief discussions with Chick and Richard Anderson on, and is looking at strategic corridors and figuring out what those strategic corridors really should be. And of course, we all know that our first round of strategic corridors is our interstate system. But there are, you know, I'm not going to be able to expand 285 because I can't afford the right-of-way. So do we go up, or do we look for another strategic corridor and maybe greenfield projects to solve some of the congestion issues? So I think we've got to think about things a little bit differently in order to solve some of these innovative ways to solve these solutions. Continuing to be the Department of Roads and Bridges is not an option for us any longer.